Why was her name missing from the report? That question would not leave her mind, no matter how many times she told herself it didn't matter. She had sat through countless briefings before, listening to the same jargon, the same calculated risk assessments, the same bravado that filled the air thicker than the smell of coffee and ink. Yet this time, as the colonel closed the folder and dismissed the room, she felt something deeper than just the familiar sting of erasure. She felt the silence pressing against her chest like a weight. Her name didn't exist on the record. No mention of her presence. No acknowledgement of what she carried or why she had been flown here on 2 hours' notice. She rose quietly from her chair, adjusting the strap of her bag, her movements practiced to draw no attention. The others laughed, some joked about the cold ahead, some muttered about the danger. None of them looked her way. That was fine. She had grown used to being unseen. But in the back of her mind, the memory of another name, her sister's, flashed across her thoughts. A name that had once meant everything, until one report had reduced it to a single line, non-essential casualty. The word still burned. The corridor outside the briefing room was colder than the air inside, and her boots echoed as she stepped into it. Sergeant Cale leaned against the wall, his cigarette ember glowing faintly like a small, angry eye. He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling around his head in lazy spirals. "They left you off again," he muttered, not even pretending to soften the truth. She didn't look at him, didn't pause. Her instinct was always to keep moving, keep her silence intact, but he fell into step beside her. "You okay with that?" His voice was different this time, quieter, as though even he was tired of the lie everyone lived by. Her throat tightened, but she forced out the words, steady, practiced. "I didn't come here for credit." The sergeant studied her for a long second. He knew better. He had seen her too many times on the edge of shadows, stepping in when no one else did. He had seen her skill save lives that never knew they'd been spared, and he knew she carried ghosts. But he said nothing more, just flicked the cigarette into the dark and walked the other way. She kept going. The hangar was alive with noise, metallic clanks, the growl of engines, men shouting last-minute checks. She moved through it like a ghost. One hand brushed the rifle case at her side, reassuring herself it was still there, the one tool that had never failed her. When the rotors began to spin, she climbed aboard with the others. No words exchanged, no introductions, just straps buckled, helmets adjusted, weapons checked. The Black Hawk lifted, shuddering as it carried them into the night. She sat at the back, pressed against the cold hull, eyes shut. Around her, the men were restless, fidgeting, muttering, clapping each other's shoulders as if their own noise could shield them from the silence waiting ahead. She stayed still, breathing with the rhythm of the blades, letting the vibrations hum through her bones. And then, without opening her eyes, she reached into her vest and touched the photograph. Her sister, a half-smile caught forever in fading ink. She traced the worn edges with her thumb, the memory tugging her deeper into herself. It had been years, but she remembered the day the report had come. One knock at the door, one uniformed officer with rehearsed words and lowered eyes, one phrase that would never leave her, non-essential casualty. That was what they had called her sister, not a loss, not a tragedy, just a line in a file no one would read again. That was the day she had stopped believing in reports. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset, 2 minutes. Her eyes opened. The storm on the horizon looked exactly as she had expected, rolling black clouds, snow swept by invisible currents, a sky that seemed to conspire against them. She adjusted her rifle, checked her scope, and closed her fingers one last time around the photograph. This mission was not about credit, not about her name. It was about making sure no one else ended up erased. The helo dipped, flared, and the world outside went white. They dropped into snow. The air swallowed them whole, cold, biting instantly through fabric, every breath visible like smoke. Boots crunched as the team spread out, the leader raising his hand, giving silent signals. She fell into line, rifle slung low, senses already stretched thin. Every sound magnified: the creak of branches, the snap of ice, the whisper of shifting snow. She had learned long ago, silence wasn't empty, it was full of warnings. They advanced toward the ruined farmhouse, the first marker. Half buried in snow, its roof collapsed, its doorway leaning crooked like a mouth about to speak. Two men stepped forward, weapons raised, preparing to breach. She whispered before the leader could signal, "Don't." The word cut through the storm. The men froze. The leader turned, frowning under his visor. "We swept it." "Not enough." She crouched, brushing away snow, her gloved fingers tracing soil disturbed just slightly. A line too faint for machines, but not for her. The wire glinted, barely visible. A tripwire. Silence fell hard. The leader swallowed, motioning the men back. No one spoke thanks, no one had to. But still, no one said her name. The storm thickened. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, radio static biting into every attempt at communication. They moved through a world reduced to shadows and instinct, their objective still miles ahead, the enemy hidden beneath stone and arrogance. Each step forward felt heavier, not from the pack, not from the cold, but from the truth pressing against her chest. She had volunteered for this mission. She hadn't told them why. They thought she was just another shadow operator, slotted in at the last minute. But the truth was darker. Her sister's final mission had been here. Not this exact valley, but close enough. A region where reports were written with lies, where names disappeared, where history turned people into nothing. She had promised herself she would come back one day, that she would walk where her sister had walked, that she would make her presence matter in a way ink never could. Now she was here, invisible again, erased again. And yet alive, with one chance. The snow muffled sound until the first gunshot broke it apart. It cracked sharp, brutal, slicing the night open. The team scattered, diving for what cover the ruined walls provided. Snow burst into clouds around them. "Sniper," someone hissed, breath white with panic. But she was already moving, crawling forward, pressing herself into the ground, letting the storm cover her. She counted seconds between echoes, felt the wind shift, watched how the snow carried sound differently through the trees. Her breath slowed, her heart matched the rhythm of silence. "Northeast ridge," she whispered, 200 meters left of the cedar. The leader stared at her, disbelief etched in his voice. "You can't." But she wasn't listening. Her rifle was already shouldered, scope fogging at the edges, her breath controlled. She let the world blur until only one thread remained, the faintest glint of glass where an enemy waited to kill again. Her finger tightened. One shot. Then silence. The men exhaled, relief sharp in their voices. They glanced at her but said nothing. No acknowledgement, no name. Just survival. She lowered her rifle, breath still steady, but inside the silence roared. Because she knew this was only the beginning. The storm would not stop, the enemy would not wait, and the truth, her truth, still remained buried. She touched her vest again, feeling the photograph through the fabric, as though her sister's face could anchor her against the void. No one had said her name. But one day they would know her story. Not through reports, not through written honors. Through history itself. How many times had silence followed her shots? The question lingered as the storm pressed harder, swallowing the valley in white. The men regrouped after the sniper fell, relief spreading in quick glances and shaky breaths. Yet no one turned to her, no one said the word that mattered most, her name. She brushed snow off her gloves, steadying her hands. The rifle's barrel still radiated faint warmth. For a moment, she thought of her sister again, the way she had laughed once carelessly in a world that now seemed too far away to ever exist. That memory was louder than the storm, louder than the rotors that had dropped them here, louder than the silence of men who could not bring themselves to speak gratitude. She swallowed it down. This wasn't the time. "Keep moving," the team leader ordered, voice sharp, trying to bury the fear that had crept into all of them. "Compound, ahead." They pushed forward. The snow was knee-deep now, the ridges disappearing in a haze of shifting gray. Every step was heavy, every sound magnified. She scanned the tree line constantly, her instincts prickling with a tension the others didn't yet feel. The storm wasn't their only enemy. Something else pressed in on them, an unseen presence that made her throat tighten. Her sister's last report had ended in this kind of silence. The memory surfaced uninvited, cruel. She could almost hear the words again, the clipped voice of the officer. She was in the wrong place, wrong time, collateral. Collateral. Her jaw clenched. She kept walking, head bowed, as though the snow itself could wash that word from memory. The team reached a ridge overlooking the valley floor. Through the storm, a faint glow broke against the white, the compound. Half-buried bunkers, concrete walls, a scattering of watchtowers. It looked almost abandoned, but she knew better. The quiet was a mask. The leader pulled them in close, his voice muffled beneath the howl of the wind. "We move on the south wall. 2 teams. Breach, secure the objective, exfil by 500. Quick in, quick out." Quick, as though any of this was quick. She said nothing, but her eyes didn't leave the compound. Something in the way the glow pulsed, faint, irregular, made her uneasy. Too much energy for a place meant to be hidden, too deliberate. Her fingers itched to speak, to warn, but she had already been ignored once tonight. She knew how this went. The leader gave signals. They split into 2 groups. She followed hers down the slope, the snow crunching loud enough to feel like betrayal. At the base of the wall, they crouched in shadow. A faint hum filled the air, almost too low to notice. The men pressed charges against the concrete, ready to blow through. And then she heard it. Beneath the storm, beneath the hum, beneath the steady pounding of her own heart. A second rhythm. A timed click. Her breath caught. "Stop," she hissed. The leader glared. "What now?" "Not a wall, a shell," she pointed, her glove brushing frost from the surface. "Charges will trigger a chain. This isn't concrete, it's layered. They buried sensors inside." The men froze. The leader leaned in, scraped the edge with his knife, and saw it, metal beneath the plaster, a web of wiring. His face went pale. If she hadn't spoken, they'd all be dead. The storm howled as silence swallowed them again. One of the younger men, eyes wide, whispered, "How did you?" But the leader cut him off. "We move, find another way." He didn't thank her. None of them did. They circled the compound, finding a drainage tunnel half-choked with ice. Tight, claustrophobic, barely wide enough to crawl. The men grumbled but went one by one. She waited at the rear, scanning the ridges, every instinct screaming that time was slipping too fast. When her turn came, she slid inside, the ice scraping her shoulders, her breath fogging the tunnel. The smell was damp, metallic. She forced herself forward inch by inch, rifle strapped tight across her back. Halfway through, the tunnel narrowed. Panic rose in her chest, sudden, fierce, unexpected. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The memory of another tunnel rushed back, years earlier, when rubble had collapsed behind her and she thought she would never see light again. Her pulse spiked. She pressed her forehead against the ice, eyes closed. Not now, not here. She forced air into her lungs, slow, deliberate, until the world steadied. The men ahead kept moving, unaware of her battle with the walls closing in. She crawled forward, pulling herself out into the compound's underbelly. The air was warmer here, filled with the low hum of generators, the faint crackle of unseen wires. The team regrouped, weapons ready. The leader raised a hand, signaling silence. They moved through narrow halls, concrete dripping with condensation. Every step echoed faintly, as though the compound itself was listening. And then came the voices. Muffled at first, growing louder. Foreign hurried tense. The team pressed against the wall, weapons raised. The leader peeked the corner, two guards in battered uniforms, arguing over something in clipped tones. The leader signaled to take them out quietly. But she hesitated. There was something about the way the guards spoke, not fear but urgency, not discipline but desperation. She caught fragments, words about transfer, about failure, about something they hadn't told command. Her chest tightened. She wanted to step forward, to demand they wait, to listen, to hear what the guards were afraid of. But the men didn't wait. Two quick shots muffled by suppressors, and the voices ended in silence. She stared at the bodies, her jaw tight. Another chance to understand erased. The leader gave the order to push deeper. They moved room by room. The storm outside faded into a dull, constant thrum replaced by the hum of machines. Something in the air smelled wrong, chemical, sharp, metallic. Her gut twisted. This wasn't just a weapons cache. The halls bent into a chamber lit by a single hanging bulb, papers scattered across tables, maps, photographs, lines of code scribbled in notebooks. And in the center, a steel case. The leader moved to it, eyes sharp with purpose. This is it, package secured. But she stood frozen at the threshold. The smell was stronger here, the hum louder. She could feel it in her bones. Something wasn't right. Her eyes scanned the papers, the maps, the fragments. Her breath caught when she saw one photograph, grainy, black and white. A woman's face half obscured, a profile blurred in motion. Her sister. Her knees almost buckled. She gripped the doorway to steady herself, her heart hammering. Why was her sister's image here? In an enemy compound, years after her death had been dismissed as non-essential. Her throat went dry. The leader barked for extraction. The men gathered around the case. No one noticed her trembling hands, her eyes locked on the photograph. The storm outside roared, but inside her world had gone silent. Because in that moment, one truth hit harder than any bullet ever could. Her sister hadn't just been collateral. She had been part of something bigger, something hidden, something erased. And now so was she. How could her sister's face be here? That question rattled her so hard she almost forgot where she was, almost forgot the storm beyond the walls, almost forgot the men standing a few feet away with a steel case in their hands. Her sister had died years ago, at least that's what the official report claimed. Yet here was her image, pinned like evidence in the heart of an enemy compound. Her hands shook. She pressed them against her rifle to hide it, praying no one saw the storm breaking inside her. The leader barked into his radio, calling for extraction, his voice clipped, rehearsed. Package secured. Repeat, package secured. Moving to exfil. But she barely heard him. Her eyes devoured the papers scattered across the table, scraps of coordinates, symbols she couldn't decode, a map with red lines drawn through valleys and ridges. The lines ended near the ridge where her sister's unit had vanished. Her stomach clenched. This wasn't coincidence. She reached for one of the pages, her gloves trembling, but a hand slapped hers away. "Leave it," the leader snapped. "We've got what we came for." Her breath caught. "This matters." "Not to us." His eyes narrowed, cold as the storm outside. Orders were clear, the case, nothing else. Don't slow us down. She wanted to argue, to scream, to force them to see what was right in front of them. But her voice stuck in her throat, heavy with the memory of every briefing where she'd been ignored, every mission where her presence had been erased. The men moved, dragging the steel case, weapons ready. She lingered a second longer, her gaze locked on the blurred photograph of her sister, until the storm in her chest threatened to spill into her eyes. She tore herself away and followed. The tunnel out felt narrower than before. Their breath fogged, the sound of boots scraping ice echoing like whispers of ghosts. She carried her silence with her, each step pounding against the weight of what she had seen. When they emerged back into the storm, the world had turned black. The snow was relentless, burying tracks, erasing paths. The extraction point was still miles away, hidden in the chaos of wind and white. The leader set the pace, pushing them hard. Every few minutes he barked at them to stay tight, to keep moving, to forget the cold that gnawed at their bones. But she lagged behind, her mind pulled elsewhere, her sister's face, the map, the lies in the report. She remembered sitting in her childhood home the night the officer had stood in the doorway, how she had tried to ask questions, only to be silenced with polite emptiness, how she had read the report again and again, searching for meaning in the sterile words, non-essential casualty. Her sister had been everything to her, brave, brilliant, reckless in ways that inspired and terrified, the reason she had joined in the first place. And now proof that her sister hadn't been a footnote, proof that she had mattered. So why had they erased her? Snow blasted against her visor, biting her skin. The men ahead moved like shadows, their figures blurring. She tightened her grip on her rifle, forcing herself back into the moment. That was when the first explosion hit. The ground erupted 50 meters ahead, a shockwave ripping through snow and silence alike. The men hit the ground, shouting over the storm. Another blast followed, closer, showering them with ice and dirt. Ambush. The storm had covered their approach, but it had also hidden the enemy. Gunfire cracked through the night, tracer rounds cutting red through the white haze. The men scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the storm. She pressed flat against the snow, scanning the ridges. The flashes gave them away, shapes moving against the wind, disciplined, coordinated. Too many. Her leader shouted into the comms, demanding support, demanding air. But static answered him. The storm had swallowed their lifeline. One of the younger soldiers, barely 20, froze, his rifle jammed, hands fumbling. She saw it instantly, the enemy shifting, zeroing in on him. Without thinking, she rose from cover, her body moving faster than her mind. She fired, her shots clean, precise, dropping 2 figures before they could fire on the boy. He stared at her, wide-eyed, stunned. "Keep your head down," she snapped, her voice sharper than she meant. He nodded, trembling, ducking low. The firefight raged. The snow became smoke. The world shrank to sound and breath and recoil. And still, inside her, the storm of questions roared louder than the battle. Why was her sister's face in that compound? Why had the leader refused to acknowledge it? What else had been hidden? She fired again, and again, each shot a release of fury she couldn't show in words. The enemy pressed hard, forcing them back. The steel case dragged with them, heavy, unwieldy, slowing their retreat. She wanted to scream at them to leave it, to see that the truth was in the papers, not in a locked box, but she knew they wouldn't. Orders came first, always. She ducked behind a ridge, her chest heaving. Snow stung her cheeks, her hands raw with cold. The leader slid in beside her, breath ragged. "You saved the kid," he muttered, almost begrudging. She didn't answer. "You're good," he added, his voice lower this time, almost admitting something. "But don't go thinking that makes you essential." Her chest burned. The word cut deeper than the cold. Essential. Her sister had been written as the opposite. Her voice cracked before she could stop it. She was essential. He looked at her, frowning. Who? She swallowed the words. Not here, not now. The storm swallowed them again, pulling them back into the fight. Hours blurred. The battle turned into a running retreat, each step an act of survival. The case slowed them, weighed them, but no one dared drop it. By dawn, the storm had eased, but the valley was littered with silence. Bodies half buried in snow, footprints erased by wind. The men huddled around a broken wall, exhausted, hollow-eyed. They had survived, barely. The leader called for pickup again, his voice raw. This time, static gave way to a crackle of acknowledgement. Extraction was coming. The men slumped, some laughing in disbelief, some whispering prayers. She sat apart, her rifle across her knees, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The photograph burned in her mind. Her sister's face, blurred yet undeniable. The report had lied, she knew that now. And if they had lied about her sister, what else had they buried? The sound of rotors came faint on the wind, growing louder. Relief spread through the men like warmth. But she didn't feel it. Because deep inside, she understood something they didn't. This mission wasn't about the steel case. It was about the silence that followed. And one day she would break it. Why did her hands shake when the room went silent? The briefing had ended. Men shuffled their papers, officers snapped their folders closed, boots scraped against the polished floor. The hum of the overhead lights filled the air with a sterile rhythm. But she didn't move. She sat, shoulders straight, chin lifted, though her pulse rattled in her wrists like small explosions. No one had said her name. Again. Her role, her contribution, her precision under fire, folded into silence as if she had been a ghost standing among them. She watched names typed on the board, names spoken with weight, names written in neat, final letters. Not hers, not this time, not the last, not ever. And still she stayed. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. It wasn't pride that held her still. It was something heavier, rooted deeper. A memory, a face she couldn't erase. The promise she had made, kneeling in the dirt with blood on her palms. That was why she endured the silence now. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her silence would echo louder than their reports ever could. The mission was already unraveling by the time their boots hit foreign soil. Dust clung to everything. The straps of her vest cut deep into her collarbone as the sun pressed down like a hand that wanted to crush. Men around her adjusted their weapons, muttered clipped curses, checked ammo they'd already checked twice. She walked quietly, scanning the horizon. They didn't ask her for input, didn't pause to wonder if she noticed something they didn't. They filled the air with their own certainty, their own weight. But she noticed. A broken fence. A shutter that moved though no wind touched it. The silence of a village that should have had the clatter of children, the bark of dogs. Her breath tightened. They pushed forward anyway. When the first shot cracked, it was like the earth exhaling a truth she had already felt. The man in front of her dropped, a sound more terrible than the rifle's bark. The squad scattered, training taking over. Voices rose, orders panic, commands clashing. But she dropped to one knee, scope already lifting, searching. Her eye narrowed against the light. There. Movement behind a low wall. The tilt of a rifle. The glint of glass just for a heartbeat. She didn't speak, didn't call it out, she just fired. Silence followed. The squad regrouped. They didn't look at her, didn't ask how she'd seen him. But two of them breathed a little easier, not knowing it was her who'd kept their lungs from being the last air they ever held. Later, under the cover of half-light, the squad huddled in an abandoned building. Dust fell like slow snow with every step on the floor above. Their voices were hushed, rough with fear they didn't want to name. She sat near the wall, back straight, rifle across her knees. She let their words pass like wind through broken glass. But her mind wasn't on their voices. It was on him. Her brother. The one who had gone before her, the one who hadn't come back. She could still see the letter folded into her hand by an officer who couldn't meet her eyes. Killed in action. Cold, unshaken words. No explanation, no story, just silence like hers now. He had been forgotten, swallowed by reports, names shuffled into lists, no weight to the life he had carried. She had promised, kneeling with that letter crumpled against her chest, that she would not let it happen again. And now here she was. Silent, overlooked, carrying the weight of his absence in her chest, in her scope, in the trigger she pulled without hesitation. But she wondered, was she becoming invisible too? The night dragged long. She listened as one soldier, voice cracking, whispered about his daughter's birthday he would miss. Another rubbed his chest as if the pain there was more memory than wound. They were human in the dark, vulnerable. Their laughter was brittle, their courage stretched thin. She wanted to speak, to tell them she understood, to tell them about the face she still saw when she closed her eyes. But silence held her, because if they didn't speak her name in the daylight, what weight would her voice carry in the night? The next day, the air smelled of metal and smoke before the fighting even began. They moved cautiously through the ruins, but caution is never enough. The sound came again, the one that ends breath, ends certainty. Chaos cracked wide. She pressed her cheek against her scope, heartbeat slowing even as the world tore apart. Her eyes searched, not her ears, because the ear lies but the eye sees truth. She caught it again. The shift, the glint, the half-second window no one else even noticed. Her shot was clean. A man fell far across the street. No one saw her do it. The squad breathed easier again. And again, her name was not spoken. When night came and they sat once more in the shadows, she let her hands tremble just once. Let the weight spill for a moment, not where they could see, only to herself. She whispered into the dark, voice so low it barely stirred the dust around her lips. For you, always for you. Her brother's face flickered in memory, his laugh, his certainty, the way he had told her once, "You're stronger than they'll ever see." Maybe he had been wrong. Or maybe he had known this silence was the battlefield she'd have to walk alone. What no one realized was that she wasn't just saving lives. She was rewriting something. Thread by thread, choice by choice, she was creating a story larger than the reports they wrote without her name. Because history does not always live in ink. Sometimes it lives in silence. And silence carried longer than any honor ever could. Why did the silence sting more than the bullets? The squad had survived another day, barely, yet as the night closed in around their temporary shelter, it wasn't the sound of distant gunfire that gnawed at her chest. It was the absence of her name. Again. Reports were written on battered tablets, sent up the chain, tallied into the faceless stream of data that defined whether missions were failures or victories. And like before, her role was scrubbed from the record. Her shots unmentioned, her steadying presence erased. It should not have mattered. Results mattered. Survival mattered. But as she lay with her back against the cracked wall, listening to the steady breaths of the others, her mind drifted somewhere else, back to a porch she once knew. Back to a morning when her brother's boots had stood on those same boards before he left and never returned. He had been erased too, a line in a report, a number added to a casualty list. No weight to his laughter, no memory of the way he used to hum under his breath while cleaning his rifle. His story, her story, silenced in official ink. And now she was repeating his fate in a different shade, alive but unseen, present but unacknowledged. The question clawed at her. Was it enough to survive if survival was invisible? They moved again at dawn. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of coming rain. Mud sucked at their boots as they crossed terrain that once held life but now bore only scars. Charred wood, collapsed roofs, windows blackened as if the earth itself had blinked and never reopened its eyes. She scanned every angle, every line of sight, every broken shape that might conceal a threat. The others trudged, shoulders stooped, their voices stripped of bravado now. Even Hale, the loudest of them all, spoke less. When a bird startled from the trees, the squad jerked, rifles snapping up. But she didn't flinch. She just tracked the line of its wings, following where it had come from, eyes narrowing at the shadowed ridge beyond. Nothing there, one muttered. But she kept watching. A glint just faint, almost lost in the mist. Her stomach knotted. She raised her scope, breath locked, the world tunneling down to a single point of glass. There it was. The shot left her barrel before anyone else even lifted their weapon. The man who had been waiting for them crumpled backward, the ridge suddenly quiet. The squad paused, looked around, uncertain why the silence had returned so quickly. None of them asked her, none of them saw. But she knew. She knew how close they had come. That night hail broke. The man who had barked at everyone, the one who scoffed at fear, sat with his face in his hands. His voice cracked like dry timber. "They sent us here to die," he muttered. "We're just numbers to them, don't you see it? That's all we are." The others fell quiet, even the air stilled. She didn't speak, but her chest burned. Because he wasn't wrong. She thought of her brother again, reduced to a number. She thought of herself, reduced to silence. And she wanted to shout, to tell them that she saw it too, that she felt it crushing her every single moment. But the words wouldn't come. She just looked at him, her gaze steady, and for a moment, just one, he met her eyes. And in that silence she hoped he understood, that she saw him, that he wasn't just a number not to her. The mission stretched on, each day another weight, each step further into nowhere. The squad grew lean with exhaustion, eyes hollow, movements mechanical. They slept in snatches, ate in silence, and carried their dead forward in memory only. She carried more than that. Every shot she fired, every quiet decision to scan just a little longer, every instinct that saved them from walking into traps, none of it recorded. None of it carried into the reports. Her name absent, again, always. And yet she couldn't stop. Because what she was protecting was larger than recognition. It was them, the men beside her, flawed, broken, sometimes blind to her presence, but human. She couldn't let them vanish into silence like her brother. Even if it meant she would. One evening, as dusk bled red across the ruined horizon, a younger soldier named Ortiz sat near her. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Why are you so quiet?" She looked at him, caught off guard. He shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "It's just, you see things before anyone else. You don't talk much. Makes me wonder what's going on in there." She almost laughed, almost told him the truth, that she was holding the weight of 2 lives, maybe more, that silence was the only shield she had left. Instead, she said, "You don't need to hear it. You just need to breathe another day." He nodded, didn't press, but something shifted. For the first time, someone saw the edges of her silence. It was enough for now. Rain came, hard, endless, beating down on their helmets until their bodies ached from the cold. They trudged through mud, vision blurred by water that smeared glass and scope alike. And still she scanned. Still she watched. Through rain streaks she caught a shape, too still, too patient. Her rifle lifted. The squad cursed the storm, blind to what stalked them. She fired. The body collapsed into the mud, unseen by anyone but her. The rain washed the blood away. No one would know. But history would. Because history wasn't just written on paper. It was carried in the hearts of those who lived when they should have died. It was carried in breath stolen back from silence. And whether her name was there or not, her mark was burned into that history. Later, as they huddled in a crumbling building, Hale muttered into the dark, "If we make it back, nobody's going to know what it took. Nobody's going to care." She closed her eyes, her throat tightened. She wanted to say it, to tell them that even if the world forgot, she wouldn't. That she would carry them, every single one. That she had already been carrying ghosts long before this mission began. But she stayed silent. Because sometimes words were too small. Sometimes silence spoke louder. And in that silence, with the rain dripping through the cracks, she felt something stir. A realization. Her brother had been erased in ink. She was being erased in reports. But the truth, her truth, was not in paper. It was in breath, in survival, in the way Ortiz's chest still rose and fell, in the way Hale's bitterness had softened just a fraction, in the way their story was still unfolding. Her name did not need to be written, because history was already carrying it. Louder than ink, louder than honor. In silence. Why did the storm feel like it was meant only for them? Rain hammered the corrugated roof of the shell they sheltered in, every drop like a drumbeat on their nerves. The squad huddled close to the walls, their gear spread out to dry though nothing ever would. Mud caked their boots, soaked their socks, stained their hands. The air smelled of rust, oil, and wet earth, heavy enough to choke. She sat apart, not far but apart, rifle across her lap, head bent slightly as if listening to something the others couldn't hear. Her silence no longer surprised them, it was expected. Like the storm itself, constant, unyielding, impossible to ignore yet never spoken of directly. Ortiz rubbed his palms together, muttering about his home, about how his mother used to complain when rain leaked through the roof in their kitchen. Hale grumbled that he'd kill for a cigarette. Another soldier, barely awake, whispered a prayer too soft for anyone to catch the words. She closed her eyes, and for just a second she let herself drift. She wasn't here, not in this storm, not in this war. She was younger, barefoot in a summer rain, her brother laughing as they dashed down the street, soaked to the bone, daring each other to leap into puddles deeper than their boots. He had looked back at her once, hair plastered to his forehead, grin wide and reckless. "You'll always outrun me," he'd shouted, voice swallowed by thunder. She hadn't outrun him, she had outlived him. The storm pulled her back. The smell of gun oil replaced grass. The taste of mud replaced summer rain. The sound of laughter replaced by silence broken only by gunfire in memory. Her chest ached with a truth she could never speak. Every step she took, every shot she fired was for him. And still his name, like hers, was absent from the records. At dawn, the storm thinned to mist. They moved again. The ground steamed under early light, rising in ribbons that distorted vision. Perfect cover for anyone waiting to end them. Her senses sharpened. She walked behind Ortiz, watching the twitch of his shoulders, the way his head jerked slightly at every noise. He was too new, too green. His body spoke of fear, of youth stretched thin across responsibility too heavy for his frame. She wanted to tell him to breathe, to slow down, to trust the silence, not fear it, but words caught unspoken. She let her presence be enough, her steady steps behind him a shield he didn't know he had. The trap came fast. A blast tore through the quiet dirt and flame thrown skyward. Ortiz stumbled forward, ears ringing, vision spinning. The squad scattered. Shouts rang out, overlapping, breaking into panic. She dropped flat, eyes sweeping. Through the haze of smoke she saw them, figures rising from behind broken stone, rifles leveled. Her pulse slowed, breath steadied, the world narrowed. She fired once, twice, again. 3 bodies fell. The squad regained footing, regrouped. Hale shouted orders, voice rough but steady again. Ortiz stumbled to her side, chest heaving, face pale. "You," he started, eyes wide, but she cut him off with the smallest shake of her head. "Don't say it, don't name it, let the silence hold." He nodded, swallowed hard, and said nothing. They moved again, slower now, wounded and wary. Every step forward was a gamble. Every hour stretched thin, pulled taut across fear and exhaustion. That night Ortiz couldn't sleep. He sat near her, hands restless on his knees. Finally, he whispered, "They'll never know, will they?" She didn't answer. "I mean what you're doing, what you've done, the shots." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It's not in the reports, I've seen them, it's like you're not even here." Her jaw clenched. Silence wrapped tighter around her, protective, suffocating. Ortiz looked at her, his face half-shadowed in the dim light. "But I know, I see it." For a heartbeat she let the words sink past her defenses. She wanted to tell him everything, about her brother, about how silence had swallowed him too, about how she feared the same fate, that one day she'd vanish, her story dissolved into nothing but numbers. But she didn't. She only whispered, barely audible, "That's enough." The mission stretched into weeks, supplies dwindled, morale cracked. They were ghosts moving through a landscape that didn't want them, shadows hunted from all sides. She grew leaner, her silence heavier, yet her shots never missed. And slowly she noticed changes. The squad didn't ask for her input, but they glanced her way before making choices. They didn't thank her, but they shifted unconsciously to follow her lead. Ortiz no longer flinched when she stood too close. Hale no longer barked at her presence. They didn't speak her name, but their survival carried it, even if they didn't realize it. Then came the night that tested her silence. They were cornered in a ravine, moonlight casting cruel shadows across jagged rock. The squad huddled, pinned by fire from above. Every path was blocked. Hale's voice was hoarse. "We're done, we can't move." The men stared at him, their fear raw, their hope slipping. Ortiz's eyes flicked to her, desperate, searching. She knew the truth. There was a way, a path barely visible, hidden by brush, leading to an angle that would turn the fight. But she would have to take it alone. No backup, no recognition. If she succeeded, they would live. If she failed, her name wouldn't even be whispered. Her silence pressed against her chest, heavy as armor. She met Ortiz's gaze, saw the plea there, the trust, the unspoken question, "Will you?" She nodded once, and without a word, she slipped into the dark. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The world shrank to the rhythm of movement, the whisper of leaves, the grit of rock beneath her palms as she climbed. Bullets cracked above, but she was already elsewhere, her body moving with a clarity born of years unseen. She reached the ridge, saw the enemy below, outlined in pale light. They were focused on the ravine, rifles trained on the men she had left behind. Her finger tightened on the trigger. One shot, two, three. The silence after was absolute. The squad below surged forward, seizing the moment, pushing past their fear. She remained in the shadows, unseen. When they regrouped, panting, shaken but alive, Hale muttered, "Lucky break." Ortiz looked toward the ridge where she stood, rifle still warm, and said nothing. But his eyes told her he knew. That night she lay awake under a sky washed clean by the storm. Stars burned cold and bright, like 1,000 unblinking witnesses. Her name would not appear in the report. It never would. But she understood now. Recognition was not the point. Survival was, memory was, legacy was. Her brother's story had not been erased, not truly. It lived in her silence, in every life she kept breathing. And hers would too. Not in ink, not in lists, but in the way Ortiz would remember, in the way Hale might think twice before dismissing another quiet presence, in the way history carries truth louder than honor written on paper. She closed her eyes, the weight still there but no longer suffocating. Sometimes silence was not absence. Sometimes it was legacy. The rain had not stopped. By the 7th night, the earth beneath the outpost was more mud than soil, trenches collapsing under the weight of water and fatigue. Yet, in that drowned silence of storm and gunfire, she stood, still carrying the weight no soldier could measure, still refusing to let it break her. The squad had changed. Once skeptical eyes had softened, once doubtful voices now carried trust. But with trust came a different kind of burden, the kind that whispered in the cold hours of dawn, "Don't fail them now." The enemy's return. It was close to midnight when Hale burst into her makeshift tent. His uniform was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes wide with a tension that words could barely hold. "They're moving again," he said, his voice stripped of all pretense of calm. "Scouts just picked up heavy tracks, armor, artillery. They're coming for us, and they're bringing more than we've ever seen." She rose without hesitation, wrapping her soaked jacket tighter around her shoulders. How long? Less than 3 hours. Her mind calculated swiftly, supply lines cut, communication still broken, reinforcements nowhere near. They had only themselves, a skeleton of an outpost, and a squad held together by worn strength and her silent persistence. "Then we'll hold," she replied simply. Hale looked at her as though she were both impossible and inevitable. He wanted to argue, to say no, they couldn't, that survival was madness against such odds. But the memory of how she had carried more than any of them, how she had never faltered even when every bone should have broken, stopped him. Instead, he gave a sharp nod and left to rally the others. Preparing for the storm. The squad gathered in the rain-slick courtyard, boots sinking into the mud. Some faces were pale, some grim, but all turned toward her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words carried because her silence had always spoken more than speeches ever could. "They think we're broken. They think the storm and the mud have already beaten us, but we're still here, and as long as we're here, we don't let them pass." The soldiers exchanged glances, some uncertain, others hardening with resolve. One of the younger privates asked, almost trembling, "And if we can't stop them?" She stepped closer, her voice steady. "Then we make them remember us." There was no roar of approval, no dramatic cheer. Just quiet nods, tight grips on rifles, and a determination that cut deeper than fear. The battle begins. The first shells landed just as dawn broke, turning the gray horizon into flashes of fire. The outpost shook, mud spraying into the air as trenches collapsed further. The squad scrambled into positions, every man and woman bracing themselves against the storm of steel. She moved among them, calm amidst chaos, adjusting defenses, steadying trembling hands. The weight on her shoulders pressed heavier with every explosion, not just the duty of survival, but the knowledge that they followed her now, not out of obligation but faith. When the enemy armor appeared, cresting the hill with grinding metal, the ground itself seemed to groan beneath their advance. "Now," she ordered. Hidden charges detonated, mud and steel flying skyward as the first tank ground to a halt, tracks twisted, fire bursting from its core. The squad opened fire, rifles spitting sparks into the storm, and the battlefield became a blur of smoke, rain, and screams. Holding the line. Hours bled into each other. The enemy came in waves, relentless and overwhelming, but the squad held. They moved like a single body now, each trusting the other, each drawing strength from the silent figure who refused to fall. When ammunition ran low, she led them in scavenging from the fallen. When positions broke, she was the one to rebuild them, her hands covered in mud and blood, her body refusing to give way. At one point, a shell tore through the outer wall, collapsing half the courtyard. Dust and debris swallowed everything in choking clouds. Through it all, her voice cut through the chaos. "On your feet, we're not done." They rose, coughing, bleeding, but alive, because she was alive, and her unshaken presence was a beacon in the storm. The breaking point. By nightfall, the outpost was barely standing. The squad was exhausted, faces hollow with fatigue, eyes burning with smoke and sleeplessness. Hale staggered to her side, his arm wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage. "We can't keep this up," he rasped. "Another wave like the last one and—" She didn't let him finish. She met his gaze, her own steady despite the dirt and exhaustion streaking her face. "Then we'll hold for one more wave." Her words weren't bravado. They weren't lies. They were simply the truth as she saw it, and because she believed it, so did they. The last stand of night. When the final wave came, it was as though the enemy meant to drown them in sheer force. Artillery screamed, armored vehicles pushed forward, and soldiers poured across the ruined fields like shadows. The squad had nothing left but their resolve. Every bullet counted, every moment stretched to breaking. In the middle of the chaos, she stood at the crumbled wall, rifle steady, her frame outlined against the fire-lit sky. She carried no medals, no rank to demand their loyalty, only the unbearable weight she bore in silence and the unyielding strength it gave. One by one, the squad took their place beside her, shoulder to shoulder, mud-stained, bloodied but unbroken. And together they held. Dawn after the fire. When the battle finally ended, silence fell heavier than any bombardment. Smoke curled into the pale light of dawn. The outpost was ruined, little more than shattered stone and ash. Yet against all odds they were still there, fewer than before, battered beyond recognition, but alive. The enemy had not broken through. She stood amidst the wreckage, her fragile frame sagging but unbowed, eyes scanning the horizon. The squad gathered around her, not because she called them, but because they had become one with her, bound by the weight she bore and the silence that had carried them through the storm. And in that silence, they understood what no medal or record could capture. She had done more than survive. She had kept them whole when everything else had shattered. The war wasn't over, but because of her, neither were they. The dawn after the siege did not bring relief, only the heavy silence of survival. The outpost, once a modest structure of stone and steel, now stood like a graveyard, walls torn open, trenches collapsed into rivers of mud, and air thick with the metallic sting of smoke. The squad moved quietly through the ruins, their boots sinking with each step, their faces marked not just with exhaustion but with the weight of what they had endured. And at the center of it all she stood. Fragile in frame, yet impossible to overlook. Her uniform clung to her like a second skin, soaked through with rain, dirt, and blood not entirely her own. Her silence carried the echo of everything they had faced, and her presence held the fragile balance between despair and the unyielding truth. They had survived because she refused to fall. Counting the living. Hale moved among the survivors, his bandaged arm stiff but functional. He called out names, one by one, waiting for replies in voices that were hoarse yet steady. Some names answered, others did not. By the time the roll was finished, the squad knew the cost. Almost half their number had fallen, their bodies still lying where they had fought, their faces half hidden in the mud. The silence that followed was heavier than any bombardment. She knelt by one of the fallen, a young private who had followed her without question from the first day. Her hands brushed the mud from his face, her fingers trembling for the first time. She did not cry, not in the way others might. Her grief was wordless, quiet, a storm carried entirely within. The others watched, their own sorrow mirrored in her silent act of farewell. Hale broke the silence. Command needs to know we're still here. If reinforcements ever come, they'll come because someone told them we didn't fall. She stood slowly, lifting her gaze to the horizon where smoke still curled. Her voice was low but certain. We'll send word, but first we bury our own. The ritual of silence. They worked for hours, hands blistered and raw, digging graves in the mud with whatever tools had survived. Rain fell in a relentless drizzle, turning soil into clay, but they kept at it, each soldier refusing to stop until every fallen comrade had a place of rest. She carried more than her share, lifting bodies with arms that should have given out days ago, her frame trembling under the weight but never faltering. Not once did she complain. Not once did she pause. When the last grave was covered, the squad gathered in a line, heads bowed. Hale began to speak, words of duty, honor, sacrifice, but she raised a hand, stopping him. No speeches, she said softly. They already know. Her silence became the eulogy, and in that silence the squad felt something larger than grief, a unity forged not in victory but in endurance. The message sent. With the dead buried, the living turned to the next task, sending word. The outpost's communication system was destroyed, its antenna twisted and useless, but she refused to let that be the end. Working through the night, she and Hale pieced together scraps of metal and wiring, their hands steady despite exhaustion. The others scavenged batteries, lenses, anything that might amplify a signal. Finally, as dawn broke again, a crackling hum filled the ruined courtyard. The makeshift transmitter sputtered, then carried Hale's rough voice into the void. Outpost Delta still holds. Enemy assault repelled. Survivors requesting immediate support. The message repeated in loops carried into the storm. Whether anyone would hear it, none of them knew. But the act of sending it, of refusing to vanish into silence, was enough. A visit from the enemy. 2 nights later, as rain lashed the outpost once more, the squad caught sight of movement on the horizon. Shapes approached, not in the overwhelming force of a battalion, but cautiously, shadows slipping through the mud. Weapons were raised, tension thick. But as the figures drew closer, they saw something unexpected. Enemy soldiers, wounded, starving, weapons lowered. They staggered into view, not as conquerors, but as men broken by the same storm. For a moment the squad froze, instinct clashing with rage. Hale muttered, "We should," but stopped when he saw her step forward. She raised no weapon. She simply met the eyes of the first enemy soldier, who collapsed into the mud at her feet, too weak to stand. Behind him, others followed, dropping their arms, surrendering not to power, but to the undeniable truth that they could no longer fight. The squad looked to her, uncertain. Her voice was quiet but resolute. "Take their weapons, treat their wounds. They fought, they bled, same as us. They are not our enemy anymore." It was a decision that cut deeper than any bullet. Mercy, in a place where none should have existed. Strength, in a form most would mistake for weakness. And the squad obeyed, because her silence carried more weight than the war itself. Reinforcements. 3 days later, the sky filled with the distant roar of engines. Reinforcements finally came, columns of vehicles pushing through the ruined landscape, banners flying, soldiers bristling with fresh weapons. The squad stood in ragged formation, their uniforms torn, their faces pale, their bodies barely able to stand. Yet when the reinforcements saw them, they did not see weakness. They saw survivors who had done the impossible, who had held when no one else could have. The commanding officer dismounted, his polished boots sinking into the mud. He looked at her, his gaze lingering longer than on anyone else. "You held this outpost?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. She nodded once, her silence answer enough. The officer's eyes moved to the graves lined neatly in the mud, then back to the weary squad still standing at her side. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he saluted. And one by one, every soldier who had come with him followed suit. The weight acknowledged. For the first time she allowed herself to close her eyes. The weight she had carried of survival, of leadership, of silence, pressed heavier now than ever. Not because it had broken her, but because it had defined her. The squad moved closer, standing not behind her, not under her, but beside her. They had once doubted her fragile frame, had once whispered their disbelief. But now there was no question left. She had borne the weight no soldier could measure, and in doing so had carried them all. Her silence was not emptiness. It was the sound of strength that needed no words. The legacy. Months later, when the war shifted and the outpost was rebuilt, stories began to spread. Soldiers who had passed through carried whispers of a woman who never faltered, who held an entire line together with nothing but her unshaken presence. Some called her a ghost, others a legend, but those who had fought beside her knew the truth. She was not larger than life. She was fragile, human, burdened beyond measure. And it was precisely that humanity, that refusal to let the weight crush her, that had made her unbreakable. Hale, long recovered, often found himself staring at her across the rebuilt courtyard. "You know," he said one evening, "they'll write songs about this one day, about how we held here against everything, but they'll never understand what it really took." She looked at him, her eyes calm, her silence deeper than words. And Hale smiled faintly. Maybe that's for the best. The final silence. Years later, when the war was nothing but history, veterans would return to the site of the outpost. They would find the graves still tended, the rebuilt walls standing strong. Somewhere among them, she would stand too, older, her frame still fragile, her silence unchanged. And though the world would try to measure her weight in medals, in victories, in the lines of books, the truth would remain beyond measure. Because her strength had never been in what she said, or even in what she did. It had been in the silence that carried them all through the fire, the storm, and the breaking. And in that silence, her legacy endured unshaken, unbroken, eternal.